My name is Corey, C-O-R-I, not Corey with a Y or an E-Y. It's an unusually feminine spelling for a guy's name, but I don't care too much about the way my parents decided to spell my name. A few years ago, I had just been let go from my first job out of college. It had been pretty good money, but the company went under, so I started applying to every job I could find. Indeed, Monster, even Craigslist. One Craigslist job I found was based on the outskirts of the city I was living in, but I was ready to take anything. The job in question was some basic data entry and assistant work, or at least that's what the job listing said. I thought it was on the up and up, however, because it was one of the few Craigslist postings that actually had a website attached to it. It was a pretty basic website in retrospect, but the company message seemed to make it sound like they were heavily about serving the city and facilitating volunteer work. Within minutes of applying, I got a response inviting me for an interview that same day. I noticed that the invite was addressed to Miss Corey, though. I was going to respond to correct them, but it read like an automated response, so I figured there would be no one to read it. I would just have to correct them once I got there, and again, it didn't seem like a big deal. I'd gotten this once or twice before. I drove to the location the company website was listed as, and it didn't seem too out of the ordinary. It was on the second floor of a small building that was sandwiched between a pawn shop and a phone store. I didn't think too much of it because even though this was kind of a weird location, a job was a job. I looked up to the second floor and saw someone looking down at me. I couldn't make out the face but could just see the silhouette of a person. I went inside the building and took the elevator up to the second floor and didn't encounter a single soul. It looked like a half-finished office floor from what I remember, with some doors opened and some locked shut, but there was simply no one to speak to, no one to inform that I was there for my interview. There was one cubicle, but one of the detachable walls had been left in another office room. There was a monitor in one room, but no computer attached to it, along with half a finished company banner and a bookcase. On closer inspection of the bookcase, I noticed that it wasn't actually full of books at all. It was just a cardboard print of books stacked together. I finally had enough at that point, and called the phone number that had been on the website, but I heard no phone ringing from where I stood. The number I called seemed to cut off after a ring and a half, sending me straight to voicemail. Sufficiently creeped out by now and wondering if I had stumbled on something I shouldn't have, I took the elevator down. As the elevator door closed, I heard someone muttering angrily. I thought that was a girl's name. I didn't want to stay to find out who had said it. Instead, I walked right back to my car and drove back home, not even daring to look up at the window of the floor I was sure I had been scheduled for. That very evening, out of morbid curiosity, I checked Craigslist. The posting was gone. I looked for the website. It had been disabled. To this day, I still wonder what or who I stumbled on. My greatest regret is not calling the police about this. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was a really nice 2-bedroom apartment, it was cheap rent, and it was close to campus, so I thought it'd be the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me, and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off. I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, so she took me to check it out. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out pictures of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it was obvious to me that she was obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there, She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle. I would hear her giggling through the walls all night, and I always wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk to me for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspect she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything at all, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn around and get startled seeing her there, but would try to start a conversation, and would just be greeted with a long, awkward pause before she let out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth, over and over again. Listening closely, I could hear that every time she turned the bolt, she was mumbling my name. Seeing her standing there in the dark saying my name to herself really freaked me out. It didn't help that she kind of looked like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I quietly snuck back to my room and tried to fall back asleep. Another night, I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure, and then awkwardly sat back and listened to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was getting worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she was not listening to me when I asked her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled that she would slit his throat. That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and then started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her that night, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act like a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on the light and shouted at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me again. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone back on, and to my shock, I had received over 40 text messages that she had sent me over the last 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" and "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I got used to checking Craigslist a while ago before buying anything new, so when my ice cream maker died, I headed there. I found the one I wanted, new in box, and emailed to see if it was still available. For some reason, I assumed I was talking to a woman, and we made plans to meet up. I had gotten sort of careless about meeting people from Craigslist in public, and had agreed to come to her home, believing that she had several kids that made it difficult to go out. I told her I'd head over after work, and we switched to text messages so I could get the address and let her know when I was on the way. I got home later that day and got a text with the address. My normal routine at this point would have been to hop in the car and use the TomTom to find it. It was 2008, but since I had already booted up my PC, I decided to just use Google Maps instead. I typed in the address and immediately got results showing that a registered, violent child sex offender lived there. I googled the phone number and the same person came up. I texted the number back to let them know I wasn't coming. Then I went to Walmart and spent $5 more to buy it there.